Hey everybody, this video is called Vengeance on Midian, and tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the 31st chapter of Numbers, where we're going to look at the vengeance on Midian. And if you remember Midian, we talked about it back in Numbers chapter 25, what the Midianites did, and this is why now you're going to see chastisement of vengeance brought upon them. So Numbers chapter 31 verses 1 and 2 says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel. Afterward you shall be gathered to your people." So today's chapter, it has many links with passages, previous passages in Numbers. And the battle with the Midianites, it modeled God's requirements for a holy war when Israel took vengeance on God's enemies, as you'll see later on in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 20 verse 1 through 18. And we see that God commands Israel to take vengeance on Midian because they were the ones responsible for corrupting Israel back in Numbers chapter 25. In verse 3 through 5 it says, "So Moses spoke to the people, saying, Arm some of yourselves for war, and let them go against the Midianites, to take vengeance for the Lord on Midian. 1,000 of each tribe, of all the tribes of Israel, you shall send to war." So there were recruited from the divisions of Israel 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war. So verses 3 through 5, we see Moses organizes the army to bring the battle against Midian. In verse 6 through 11, it says, "Then Moses sent them to war, 1,000 from each tribe. He sent them to the war of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, with the holy articles and with the signal trumpets in his hand. And they warned against the Midianites, just as the Lord commanded Moses when they killed all the males. They killed the kings of Midian with the rest of those who were killed, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. Balaam, the son of Beor, they also killed with the sword. And the children of Israel took the women of Midian captive with their little ones, and took as spoil all their cattle, all their flocks, and all their goods. They also burned with fire all the cities where they dwelt, and all their forts. And they took all the spoil and all the booty of man and beast." In verse 11 there, it has the word booty, which many people take in a different sense today. But interestingly, as you go through these verses, the priest went with the nation into battle. And the priest went with the holy articles. And the Midianite men were killed. And we see that the women and the children of the Midianites were taken as servants, with all their possessions being taken as a spoil. And the wicked prophet Balaam was also now dead, as he was judged by this vengeance brought upon them by God through Israel. And that money that Balaam loved, if you remember the earlier chapters, I believe chapters 24 and 25, Balaam was a man that loved money, and we're going to look in Jude later again to see the evidence that Balaam did what he did for monetary gain. And he died the death of the company of sinners and not the righteous, even though Balaam put on the show and said, that, I want to die with the righteous. But he died in the company of sinners. And that was back in Numbers 23 verse 10, where he longed for a righteous death. So he didn't get his way because he was for the things of this world. In verse 12 through 20 says, "Then they brought the captives, the booty, the spoil to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and to the congregation of the children of Israel, to the camps of the plains of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho. And Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the congregation went to meet them outside of the camp. But Moses was angry with the officers of the army, with the captains over thousands and captains over hundreds, who had come from the battle. And Moses said to them, Have you kept all the women alive? Look, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Now therefore kill every male with the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man intimately. But keep alive for yourselves all the young girls who have not known a man intimately. And as for you, remain outside the camp 7 days. Whoever has killed any person, and whoever has touched any slain, purify yourselves and your captives on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Purify every garment, everything made of leather, everything woven of goat's hair, and everything made of wood. So verses 12 through 20 here, all the Midianites except the virgin woman were to be put to death. In verses 12 through 20 here, it's very brutal, especially when you look at verse 16 or verse 17. Now therefore kill every male among with the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man intimately. So verse 17, not many people like to read that verse, because when God called for vengeance on the Midianite people, he wanted everyone killed, including the children. And maybe you're going to be one of those people that, like, man, that's really harsh. And, you know, it is very hard to swallow that pill in Scripture here. But there's a reason behind why God had called for the children to be killed as well. Because the Midianite children would grow up to come back and bring revenge for killing their ancestors against Israel. So that's why the children were killed as well. And both the soldiers and spoil needed to be cleansed, and the execution of the male children and women of childbearing age ensured the extermination of the Midianites, and it prevented them from ever again seducing Israel to sin. And it was the Midianites living in Moab who were destroyed here. And when you see the Midianite reference later in the book of Judges chapter 6, it's a different clan. The Midianites in Judges chapter 6 is not the same tribe that you read in Numbers. And Moses was angry when Israel failed to see the danger of sexual immorality and idolatry that were posed by these women that they were sparing, who before led the men of Israel into the sins to where it brought them to this spot. And now critics, as I mentioned, will say killing male children was harsh, but as mentioned, they would have came back and gotten revenge against Israel for their father's deaths. And they would also perpetuate Midian culture, as the Midianite culture was very anti-God. And not just very, it was anti-God. In verse 21 through 24, says, Then Eleazar the priest said to the men of war who had gone to the battle, This is the ordinance of the law which the Lord commanded Moses. Only the gold, silver, bronze, iron, and the tin and the lead, everything that can endure fire, you shall put through the fire, and it shall be clean and be purified with the water of purification. But all that cannot endure fire, you shall put through water, and you shall wash your clothes on the 7th day, and be clean, and afterward you may come into the camp. So verses up through 24 right here, 21 through 24, we see the material spoil had to be purified by fire or cleansed with water only, and then it could be used as fit by God among the people of Israel. In the remainder of these verses, a big portion here, the division of the plunder, verse 25 through 54. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Count up the plunder that was taken of man and beast, you and Eleazar the priest, and the chief fathers of the congregation, and divide the plunder into 2 parts, between those who took part in the war, who went out to battle, and all the congregation. And levy a tribute for the Lord on the men of war who went out to battle, one of every 500 of the persons, the cattle, the donkeys, and the sheep. Take it from their half and give it to Eleazar the high priest, or the priest, as a heave offering to the Lord. And from the children of Israel half you shall take one of every 50, drawn from the persons, the cattle, the donkeys, and the sheep, from all the livestock, and give them to the Levites, who keep charge of the tabernacle of the Lord. So Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses. The booty remained from the plunder which the men of war had taken was 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 persons in all, of women who had not known a man intimately. In the half, the portion for those who had gone out to war was in number 337,500 sheep. And the Lord's tribute of the sheep was 675. The cattle were 36,000, of which the Lord's tribute was 72. The donkeys were 30,500, of which the Lord's tribute was 61. The persons were 16,000, of which the Lord's tribute was 32 persons. So Moses gave the tribute, which was the Lord's heave offering, to Eleazar the priest, as the Lord commanded Moses. And from the children of Israel's half, which Moses separated from the men who fought, now the half belonging to the congregation was 337,500 sheep, 36,000 cattle, 30,500 donkeys, and 16,000 persons. And from the children of Israel's half, Moses took one of every 50, drawn from man and beast, and gave them to the Levites, who kept charge of the tabernacle of the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. Then the officers who were over thousands of the army, the captains of thousands and captains of hundreds, came near to Moses. And they said to Moses, "Your servants have taken account of the men of war who are under our command, and not a man of us is missing. Therefore we have brought an offering for the Lord, what every man found of ornaments, of gold, armlets, and bracelets, and signet rings, and earrings, and necklaces, to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord." So Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from them, all the fashioned ornaments, and all the gold of the offering that they offered to the Lord from the captains of thousands and captains of hundreds was 16,750 shekels. The men of war had taken spoil every man for himself. And Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from the captains of thousands and of hundreds, and brought it into the tabernacle of meeting as a memorial for the children of Israel before the Lord. So we see quite a bit of reading here on the division of the plunder. But the plunder was divided equally between those who went and fought and those who stayed. And a portion of the spoil was to be given to God. And we see, once again, offerings to God taking place. So to do a wrap-up in this longer passage, we saw that God commanded Israel to take vengeance on the Midianites. And the reason why God has called Israel to take vengeance on the Midianites is because they seduced Israel into sexual immorality and idolatry back in Numbers chapter 25. And now vengeance may seem unloving, especially to people today that don't like the Old Testament. They don't like looking at the character of God and God's wrath and God's anger. And some may even think it goes right against Romans chapter 12, verse 19, where it says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." And Romans 12:19 tells us not to take vengeance, that vengeance belongs to the Lord. But Israel here was a unique situation. It was a unique place with a special call to be an instrument of God's judgment. Because when God wants to bring judgment, he has an instrument behind it. And, the fairy tales of God striking people with lightning bolts, it doesn't always work that way. Yeah, you can be struck by lightning, but God is going to use people as instruments to carry out his judgment. And they had a unique place in God's plan, and we're ought not to take vengeance upon ourselves. We should not look at Numbers chapter 31 and be like, let's black Sharpie out Romans 12:19. We can take vengeance as Christians through war or violence or whatever forth. That's not what this passage is telling us. And evil comes when we take vengeance into our own hands. And today the governments have ordained authority to take vengeance upon evildoers. We have, the police, we have our court systems. They're supposed to punish the wicked, as Romans 13 says. And we saw that Moses organized the army to fight Midian, where the battle was fought, and Midian was defeated and spoil was taken. And then we see also Balaam, the troubled prophet, back from Numbers 23 through 25. He is killed, and we see that he had a love of money, but he was the mastermind behind the Midianites' seduction of Israel. And if you remember from King Balak asked Balaam to curse Israel multiple times, and God, gave a prophecy through Balaam to King Balak that's not what's going to happen here, pal. And let's go over to Jude chapter 1. I almost said Jude chapter 11, but Jude's only a single chapter in the book, at the very end, right before Revelation. So I covered this verse back when we were talking about Balaam, but I want to read it again today. Jude verse 11. It says, "Woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and have run greedily in the error of Balaam for profit, and perished in the rebellion of Korah." And remember that Balaam had a love for money, and we see Moses gets angry with his people, Israel, because they kept the woman of Midian following the attack against Midian, when it was really the woman that really got them to this point, as they were seducing them into sexual immorality. And they failed to see the great danger they presented in sexual immorality and idolatry, as Israel was led into sin. And sometimes we can be just like Israel in that passage, where we get tripped up on things because we don't see them as a threat, and we fall right into the mess. And Israel saw that the women were safe, but they were the most dangerous outside of the men to Israel. And we think of many things that are dangerous to us as Christians today. We think of hostile governments such as Canada, who persecuted Christians or prosecuted Christians through the court system. And we see, tons of religious liberty threats around the globe happening today, like Canada and perhaps the United States. We see a secular society and academic institutions and so on, but there's things that we accept in our midst as Christians that open the door to immorality and idolatry that can do much more damage than the government or society can overall. And we see the purification of the spoil process, and spoil had to be purified by fire or cleansed by water, and then only was it fit for use by God among the people of God. And in the same way, God purifies us still today. God purifies us. He builds us stronger through the fires of trials. And we know that the water of washing, God purifies us. And I want to look at Ephesians chapter 5, verse 26. And this has been a popular verse that I've read through our studies here in the Old Testament. Ephesians 5:26, it says that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word. So God uses the ministry of his word to wash us clean. And we see that the chapter ends with the spoil being divided among the soldiers in the nation at large. And that's going to wrap up this video. I know it was quite long, but we'll be back on Saturday as we're going to look at the 32nd chapter on the tribes of Reuben and Gad. So I hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll see you Saturday. God bless.